Oglethorpe's first interview with the Indians. James Oglethorpe, moved by the wretched conditions of the prisoners in England's debtors' prisons, secured permission to start a colony in Georgia in 1733. There was also in view the idea of making the colony in line of frontier defense against the Spaniards in the south. This was the last unsettled land between Maine and Florida. Oglethorpe made peace with the Indians, forbade the introduction of slaves and rum, and limited land's holdings to each settler. These restrictions did not attract new colonists, and prosperity was slow in coming until they were relaxed in 1749. Spain had never given up her claim on the southern coast, and much of the time up to 1748, when this dispute was settled, was consumed with beating back the ambitious Spaniards.
Hello, and if you've enjoyed some of our work that you've seen here, please do me a favor and click there over on Patreon corner, and you can become a patron, and for like $1 a month you can give me input on anything that you think would be good to continue on. So we do so much different things, and it's hard to see what people want to see next, so become a contributor as well as have an opinion on what we do next. Thank you.
Pontiac, uniting the tribes in conspiracy. Because the French were defeated, all was not yet safe for the ever-expanding English. Pontiac, as able an Indian as has ever lived, united the jealous tribes for one final effort in 1763. Had he lived 100 years earlier, he might have succeeded. He led his followers to many victories, but the end was never in doubt. Pontiac died at the hands of one of his own race who, for a barrel of rum, struck him down from behind. Pontiac's war showed London that the menace of the frontier remained. 10,000 troops were accordingly kept in the colonies, and it was planned to support them in part by the proceeds from the stamp tax, resistance to which was one of the links in the chain of events leading to the Revolution. I would appreciate if you could please go over and click on the subscribe and hit the notifications so you can know next time we have something new coming on. And sorry for the interruption, but back to the show.
of the Lamb, in the midst of the street of it. And on either side of the river was there the tree of life. This tree of life bare 12 manners of fruit, which yielded fruit every.
Excuse me, Father, I am in need.
No problem, I said. I was just running through this morning's sermon, seeing how it felt. How can I help you?
Dr. Ezekiel sent me to get you. He said you were Tracy Heckle's caretaker, but you said I was hers. Why would he say that? I want you to explain it to him.
Technically, he is right. But as penance to you, I assign you this duty. For me and God, like your soul, I am the ultimate responsibility.
Tracy is awake, sir. Luke is with her.
Oh my, the poor child must be terrified. I must go to her. What calls the slave? Grave head doctor to our floor. I already saw that Ezekiel was on the way. So we'll take over from here. I am her caretaker. A little bit of charity from me.
Slow down, Father. Not yet. She's currently getting dressed.
Dear son, I'm a man of God. I'm safe from temptations of the flesh. I'm celibate.
Sorry, I guess I was more worried as to how she might feel. Oh, and why did you not ask why she had to be dressed?
I assumed she wet herself and they were still cleaning them.
Maybe. So you don't think they would have brought her some new ones till then?
Well, ever since we had to pay for her charity, her care, Dardanos, put a limit on what to spend?
It's not like we throw them out after one use. We even have our own laundromat downstairs, not to mention that she is still human.
Well, as we sit here and argue the words of venom, Tracy is alone and terrified.
She's not alone. Nurse Shania is in there. I'm waiting for her.
The Bible. Currently, knowledge defines it as one of a few books that record a single tribe of humanity from prehistory to current history through religious parables. It was easier when it was simply called the Word of God. The truth complicates the world. It takes away the mysteries. As it explains everything away, humanity is left with nothing to fear. But that's why it has no faith. But believe me, humanity will fear again. They will question reality. And then they will pray or be prey.
Let me light hand.
Bartola discovers the Golden Gate. The period which witnessed the decline of the Spanish power in Europe saw the steady growth of her influence in southwestern America. Explorers and missionaries pushed their way into Lower California and then into California itself. An expedition under Don Gaspar de Portola left San Diego in July 1769, and a few months later emerged from the forest to see stretched below the great harbor of San Francisco Bay and the rock pillars of the Golden Gate. Reading the decree expelling the Acadians. The English now decided to make a solid their hold on Nova Scotia, and the expulsion of the Acadians was agreed on. It is doubtful whether these farming people were a real menace, but the English thought they were, and assembling them in their village churches, read them the decree of expulsion. They were forced onto ships and scattered heartlessly throughout the colonies. Longfellow was told a romantic story of this unnecessary brutality in Evangeline. Yeti. In the history of the natural world to the supernatural, I found many weird things. But just because I don't know what it is doesn't make it supernatural. While the true heart of science is to always question even yourself. In the end, I have become an objective atheist. I am an atheist, but I want there to be more. The Yeti, or the abominable snowman, is an ape-like entity taller than an average human, but is said to inhabit the Himalayan regions of Nepal, Bhutan, and Tibet. The names Yeti and Mehte are commonly used by the people indigenous to the region and are part of their history and mythology. Stories of the Yeti first emerged as a facet of Western popular culture in the 19th century. The scientific community has generally regarded the Yeti as a legend. Given the lack of conclusive evidence, in one genetic study, researchers matched DNA from hair samples found in the Himalayas with a prehistoric bear from the Pleistocene area, epoch. Sounds like it could be a bear or a later descendant of prehistoric bear, possibly more bipedal than earlier bears, maybe to adjust to climbing. With multiple sightings and samples taken from 1899, with current reports still coming in, like the Bigfoot It's the mass amount of evidence that brings it into a possibility. A few hoaxes do happen, but not all of them. In 2013, a call was put out by scientists from the universities of Oxford and Louisiana for people claiming to have samples from these sort of creatures. A mitochondrial DNA analysis of the 125 RNA genes was undertaken on samples of hair from an unidentified animal from Ladakh in northern India on the west of the Himalayas and one from Bhutan. Those samples were compared to those in the gene bank, an international repository of gene sequencing and matching. A sample from an adjacent polar bear jawbone found in Svalbard, Norway, that dates back between 40,000 and 120,000 years ago. The results suggested that, barring hoaxes of planting samples or contaminations, bears in that region may have taken to be Yetis. Professor of evolutionary genetics at the University of Cambridge, Bill Amos, doubted the samples were of polar bears in the Himalayas, but was 90% convinced that there is a bear in the region that has been mistaken for a Yeti. Professor Byron Sykes, whose team carried out the analysis of the samples at Oxford University, has his own theory. Now, you can go with the hair samples of the bear can go two ways. I've heard description of Yeti as it was wearing something. Basic clothes, but what if it had a fur of a bear that was available? Or it could have been the bear. This kind of goes into similar Bigfoot searches. And these fall into a few categories: misidentified wildlife, known or unknown; ancient remnant human subspecies, or subrace I should say, as in the caveman; Gigantopithecus or other related primates; or the hoax. I do believe that there's something there once again, but what? And not everything that seems to fall under the definition of Bigfoot, or in this case the Yeti, but similar description, is not necessarily the same definition. I think the hoax would be difficult, if not dangerous, in those environments. So unlikely, but not impossible. Possible to increase tourism, except for the willingness of society, religion, and history to back it up. Next is Gigantopithecus, or Bigfoot-like undiscovered hominid. This one is possible, as Bigfoot, which to me stands about 50-50. Ancient remnant human race. If so, they would probably be the Denisovans, or from the Homo heidelbergensis, a super athlete gene that helped Sherpas and other Tibetans breathe easily on high altitudes, was inherited from an ancient species of human. The gene variant came from the people known as the Denisovans, who were extinct soon after they mated with the ancestors of Europeans and Asians around 40,000 years ago. This is another type of version of a gene acquired from interbreeding with another type of human, has been shown to help modern humans adapt to their environment. As with the Neanderthal and the Homo sapiens, both the Neanderthal and the Denisovans were split-offs of the Homo heidelbergensis. While only heidelbergensis was even close to the dimensions, it was still not quite there. It wasn't quite as large. But maybe with evolutionary's help, or neither of these still had heavy hair coats. But it could be clothes. Some stories, as I've said, have included them wearing caveman leather clothing. But this one seems a little less likely because of the terrain, but again, not impossible. Finally, we have misidentified animal, known or unknown. This one seemed to take more strength with me along as I've studied into this, and I hadn't seen this before. But just recently, with the multiples of samples coming in, bear comes up a lot, but not always. What kind, or occasionally, a sort of bear that could exist, or shouldn't be in that area. If you've seen a wet polar bear stand up, or seen some injured bears with front paws hurt, who adapt to a rear leg movement, as well as recently seen videos that was again thought to be a Bigfoot youth playing, but ended up being a bear cub with mange. And again, if you remember the Chupacabras videos, Maine seems to be expanding as the environment is changing. The undiscovered or ancient believed extinct type of bear seems to have the most evidence, possibly a snub-nosed bear adapted for climbing, having longer limbs, etc. All I am sure of is that something unknown is there. Native lore supports that it does or did exist. Some might account for racial memory because the people actually do have a record with another human species, but that does not cover the sightings by tourists. Something is there. Any basic search will find hundreds of sightings. Most are misidentified nature, but how many are unknown? How many of them are out there? And how many are still too much to ignore? Retreat from Concord. After Lexington, the British pushed on to Concord, and covering the bridge made a gesture at destroying the colonial stores. Those at the bridge were soon attacked by an overwhelming number of militia. The whole body was being forced to retreat to Boston. The shot heard around the world had been fired, and the revolution had begun. During the retreat, the redcoats of the British made easy marks for the American sharpshooters from farmhouse windows and from behind the fences and trees. The finest British troops have been surrounded, ambushed, and outflanked. The wonder is that they escaped complete capture. Washington at Fort Duquesne. The pace now quickened, for Pitt was in the saddle in England, determined to force the affairs at long last to a conclusion. A terrific bombardment forced his heroic defenders of Louisburg to surrender at Lord Jeffreys Amherst in 1758 in New York. Despite the catastrophe at Ticonderoga, Fort Frontenac was taken, and the same year, Fort Duquesne was abandoned by the French to an expedition headed by John Forbes, in which Washington had a subordinate command. It was the beginning of the end, for both wings of the French dominions had begun to crumble, one of the Atlantic and the other on the Great Lakes. Washington crosses the Delaware. Frederick the Great once said that Washington's successes between December 24th, 1776 and January 4th, 1777, were the most brilliant in military history. Moving quickly, he pushed his way through the ice-clogged Delaware, marched to Trenton through the sleety night, and early in the morning of December 26th captured the surprised town. Still moving fast, he was back across the river before he could be caught, only to recross it again on the next day of the year, or only to recross it again on the last day of the year. Then he struck again with lightning speed.